Hello, my name is Callum Hawke. I'm a 42-year-old carpenter born and raised in Portland, Oregon. For as long as I can remember, I have always had a special connection with wood. There's something about the texture, the smell, the way it molds to my hands that has always fascinated me. I grew up watching my father work in his workshop, and it was there that I learned not only carpentry techniques, but also to respect and love this noble material. My life has always been pretty ordinary, you know? I married my high school sweetheart Rachel 15 years ago. We have two wonderful children, Tommy, aged 10, and Sarah, aged 7. We live in a simple but cozy house, which I have renovated over the years. I've always been a calm guy. I like fishing on the weekends, having a beer with friends after work, and spending my free time with my family. I've never been very religious, I confess. I went to church from time to time, more to please my mother than out of any conviction. I believed in God, of course, but I was never one of those people who always quoted the Bible or talked about miracles. For me, God was more in nature, in the wood I worked, than in the Sunday sermons. My life was normal, even routine. I woke up early, went to the workshop, came home at the end of the day, had dinner with my family, watched a little TV and went to sleep. On the weekends, maybe a barbecue with the neighbors or a walk in the park. Nothing extraordinary. Oh, there's one more important thing about me. I'm diabetic. Type 1, diagnosed when I was 25. It was a shock at first, but over time I learned to deal with it. Insulin A, glucose measurement, controlled diet, everything became part of the routine. I've had a few scares with hypoglycemia over the years, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with a little orange juice or some mints. I never imagined my life could change so drastically, that I could experience something so extraordinary. Something that would challenge everything I believed, everything I thought I knew about life and death. What I'm about to tell you happened in the early hours of August 30th, 2017. A date that will forever be etched in my memory. That's when I died. Yes, you heard right, I died. For 18 minutes. And what happened during those minutes? Well, that's something I'm still trying to fully understand. I know it may sound crazy. Believe me, I often think I've gone crazy. But it happened. It was real. As real as the wood I shape every day, as palpable as the love I feel for my family. And now, I feel like I need to share this story. Not to convince anyone, not to become famous or anything like that, but because, maybe, someone out there needs to hear this. Maybe you. So if you're willing to listen, I'll tell you what happened that night. How I died. And how somehow I came back. It all started like a normal night. Rachel and I had gone to bed around 10 p.m. after putting the kids to bed. I remember checking my glucose before bed. It was a little low, so I ate an apple. Nothing out of the ordinary. But at 2 a.m. I woke up feeling strange. My whole body was shaking, and I was drenched in cold sweat. My vision was blurred, and I could barely focus on the objects around me. I recognized the symptoms immediately. Severe hypoglycemia. Rachel, I called, my voice coming out weak and shaky. Rachel, wake up. I need help. My wife woke up with a start. Years of living with my condition had made her an expert in emergencies. She ran to the kitchen and came back with a glass of orange juice. Here, love. Drink this, she said, trying to bring the glass to my lips. But something was wrong. Very wrong. I could hear Rachel, I could see the glass in her hand, but it was like my brain couldn't process what was happening. Instead of accepting the help, I felt a wave of anger wash over me. Get out of here, I shouted, pushing his hand away. The glass flew, spilling juice all over the floor. I saw the shock and fear in Rachel's eyes. Part of me wanted to apologize, to say I wasn't myself, but that part was being suffocated by an irrational rage that I couldn't control. Callum, please, Rachel begged. You need something to drink, I'll get more juice. But I didn't let her leave the room. I grabbed his arm tightly, shouting nonsense. I was beside myself, completely overcome by the confusion and aggression caused by severe hypoglycemia. Rachel managed to free herself and ran to the phone. I heard her calling 911, her voice shaking with fear. My husband, he's diabetic. He's having a crisis. Please come quickly." While she was talking on the phone, I was wandering around the house, knocking things over, screaming. The sounds woke up the children, who appeared at the bedroom door, scared. "Daddy?" Tommy called, his voice small and scared. Seeing my children there, witnessing that scene, should have brought me back to my senses. But he didn't bring it. Instead, I yelled at them to get back to the room, my voice so full of rage it made them recoil in terror. Rachel quickly took the children back to their room, locking the door. I could hear her trying to calm them down, saying that Daddy was sick, that everything would be okay. But it wouldn't be okay. Not that night. I heard the sirens approaching. A distant part of my mind knew that help was coming, that I needed to calm down and let them help me. But that part was constantly being drowned out by the confusion and anger caused by hypoglycemia. When the paramedics arrived, I was on the front porch, screaming into the night sky. Rachel opened the door, quickly explaining the situation, but when they tried to approach me, the situation got worse. "Stay away from me," I shouted, backing away. My vision was so blurry that the paramedics looked like menacing shadows. That's when the police arrived. And that's when everything really got out of control. The arrival of the police only worsened the situation. The flashing lights, the loud voices, all added to my confusion and agitation. I couldn't understand what was happening. I just knew I felt threatened. "Sir, we need you to calm down," I heard one of the officers say, his voice firm but cautious. But I couldn't calm down. My body was in total panic, my brain deprived of the sugar it needed to function properly. I was a time bomb waiting to explode. I saw one of the paramedics approach with something in his hand. It was Ativan nasal spray, a sedative. But in my confused mind, it felt like a gun. I reacted instinctively, pushing him with all the strength I could muster. The paramedic staggered back, almost falling. It was at that moment that the police decided they needed to physically restrain me. Everything happened very quickly after that. I felt hands grabbing me, trying to immobilize me. I fought them with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I heard shouting, orders being given, Rachel begging them to be careful. In the midst of the confusion, I felt a strong impact on my head. One of the police officers had hit me with his baton, probably in a desperate attempt to subdue me. The pain was intense but curiously clear through the fog of my mind. I staggered back, my vision darkening at the edges. I felt my body fall, but I didn't feel the impact. It was like he was falling in slow motion, each second stretching into an eternity. Then suddenly everything was quiet, incredibly, eerily quiet. I could no longer hear the screams, the sirens, anything. I couldn't feel my body, I couldn't see anything but absolute darkness. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't breathing. My heart had stopped. I was dead. I heard distant voices as if they were coming from far away. It was the paramedics, starting cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I felt the rhythm of the compressions in my chest, but it was as if it were happening to someone else. No pulse. Starting CPR. Prepare the defibrillator. The voices came and went, sometimes clear, sometimes indistinct. I floated in the darkness, aware that something monumental was happening but unable to do anything about it. I felt the shock of the defibrillator once, twice, 3 times. Each shock was like a flash of light in the darkness pulling me back, but not enough. Still no pulse. Continue compressions. Time seemed to have no meaning. It could have been seconds or hours, but it was exactly 18 minutes. 18 minutes I was clinically dead. And then, just as the paramedics were about to give up, it happened. My heart skipped a beat, started beating again. Weak at first, but gaining strength. "We have a pulse! He's back!" I heard the exclamation of relief, felt the shift in energy around me. But I wasn't really back. Not yet. Because during those 18 minutes, I wasn't simply floating in the darkness. I've been somewhere else. A place that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer lying on the porch floor. I was standing in the middle of the living room of my house. But it wasn't the room I knew. The walls, which had always been simple wood, now glowed an intense golden hue, as if they were alive. My first instinct, as a carpenter, was to touch this extraordinary wood. When my fingers touched the surface, something incredible happened. The wood spoke to me. Yes, you heard right. The wood spoke. "I am the greatest wood that was ever made," said a soft but powerful voice coming directly from the wall. I took a step back, shocked, but I didn't feel scared. It was as if it were perfectly natural, as if I had always known that wood could talk. I just didn't remember it until that moment. I looked at my hands, expecting to see the familiar calluses, the little scars from years of working with tools. But my hands were perfect, without marks. And more than that, they seemed to emit a soft light. I decided to move towards the front door, but realized I wasn't walking. It was floating, gliding through the air as if gravity were just a suggestion, not a law. When I reached the door, it opened on its own, without me touching it. And what I saw on the other side, well, there are no words in any language that can adequately describe it. The sky was such an intense blue that it seemed almost solid, but it wasn't just a color that I saw with my eyes. I could feel the blue as if every cell in my body was tuned to that incredible color. In the garden, the grass sparkled as if each leaf was made of emerald, and the old maple tree that stood in the center of the lawn, it was alive in a way I had never seen before. Its leaves, in an impressive shade of red and gold, seemed to dance, even when there was no wind. And I could have sworn I heard the tree laughing, a joyful, musical laugh that made my heart fill with joy. I looked up at the sky again, looking for the sun, but what I saw was not the sun I knew. It was a light, yes, but a living, conscious light. It was as if the light itself was a being, a powerful and benevolent presence that radiated not only luminosity, but also love, compassion, and a deep peace that I had never experienced before. I felt connected to everything around me, not just connected, but an integral part of everything. It was as if the boundaries between me and the world around me had dissolved. I was the grass, I was the tree, I was the light. Everything was one, and I was part of that unity in a way that my human mind could barely comprehend. As I floated through the garden, I noticed that the colors seemed to have a life of their own. They not only existed, but danced, sang, and moved in complex patterns that told stories. The red of the maple tree leaves wasn't just a color, it was a symphony of love and growth. The green of the grass was a poem about life and constant renewal. It was then that I noticed something even more extraordinary. Tiny spheres of light, no bigger than fireflies, floated through the air. They pulsed with colors I didn't even know existed, colors for which we have no names in our earthly language. These spheres appeared to be conscious, moving with purpose and intention. One of these spheres approached me, hovering right in front of my face. Somehow I knew she wanted to communicate. Not with words, but with feelings and images. When I opened myself to this communication, I was flooded with a wave of pure, unconditional love. It was as if all the compassion in the universe had been concentrated in that small sphere of light. Tears ran down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, of understanding, of a sense of belonging that I had never experienced before. As I took in this incredible experience, I noticed that the light in the sky, the one I had thought was the sun, was changing. It began to take shape, transforming into something that looked like a huge door made of pure light. It was both frightening and irresistibly attractive. I felt a gentle pressure on my back, as if a gentle breeze was pushing me toward that door of light. But before I could move, I heard familiar voices coming from the house's porch. I turned around and saw something that made my heart, if I still had a heart in that state, jump. On the porch were my parents who had passed away years ago, my grandparents, and even my older brother who died when we were children. Everyone looked young, healthy, and beaming with happiness. Beside them, I saw Rachel, my wife, kneeling and crying. She seemed to be holding something. With a shock, I realized that it was my own body that she was hugging. I could feel her love, her pain, her despair. It was as if his feelings were tangible, waves of emotion that I could touch and feel. My children, Tommy and Sarah, were there too, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. But the most surprising thing was that they seemed to see me. Not the body Rachel held, but the ethereal eye that floated in the garden. Their eyes shone with a wisdom beyond their years, as if in that moment they understood things that their young minds normally could not comprehend. I was torn between the joy of seeing my departed loved ones and the pain of seeing my family suffering. It was a strange sensation being between two worlds, able to see and feel, both with a clarity I had never experienced before. It was in this moment of conflict that I heard a voice I knew but had never heard before, a voice that resonated not just in my ears, but in every fiber of my being. "Callum," the voice called. And when I looked up, toward the source of that voice, I saw something that would change my life forever. Floating above me, enveloped in a cloud of light so bright it should have blinded my eyes, if I still had eyes in that state, was a man. But he was no ordinary man. It was him. Jesus. Don't ask me how I knew. I simply knew, with a certainty that went beyond any doubt or questioning. It wasn't a matter of seeing and recognizing. It was a question of knowing, in the deepest sense of the word. At that moment I fell to my knees. Or at least, that was the feeling I got, even though I was floating. It was as if the entire weight of my existence, all my actions, thoughts, and feelings, had suddenly become palpable. And then, something extraordinary happened. My entire life flashed before my eyes. But it wasn't like in the movies, a quick parade of memories. It was more like I was flipping through the pages of a huge book, each page a scene from my life. I saw moments of joy, the birth of my children, my marriage to Rachel, the first time I was able to create something beautiful with my own hands. But I also saw moments I wasn't proud of. The times I was selfish, the times I hurt people I loved, the times I chose the easy path instead of the right one. Every action, every choice, every thought was there exposed, and with each memory came a deep understanding of the consequences of my actions, of how they affected not just me, but everyone around me. Guilt and shame began to consume me. Tears streamed down my face as I saw with painful clarity all the times I failed, when I wasn't the person I should have been. "Forgive me," I whispered, my voice broken with emotion. "Please forgive me." It was then that Jesus spoke again. His voice was gentle, filled with a love I could barely understand. "It doesn't exist here," he said, making a sweeping gesture. And in that instant, all the guilt, all the shame, all the regret just disappeared. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, or death, I supposed, I felt truly free. I looked at Jesus, my heart overflowing with gratitude and love. His face radiated a compassion and wisdom that went beyond anything I had ever experienced. "Callum," he said, his voice echoing not just in my ears, but in every fiber of my being. "You are free to come if you want, but you can also come back if you wish." The choice took me by surprise. To go back? Could I go back? Part of me wanted to stay there forever, in that place of peace and unconditional love. But then, I heard Rachel cry. I saw the fear in my children's eyes. I don't know," I stammered, torn between the desire to stay and the need to return to my family. Jesus smiled, a smile full of understanding and love. "It's your choice, Callum. There's no wrong decision here." I closed my eyes, thinking. I remembered the treehouse I had promised to build for Tommy and Sarah. I remembered the plans Rachel and I had made for the future. There was still so much to be done, so many promises to keep. When I opened my eyes again, I saw that Jesus was still there, waiting patiently. His presence was comforting, giving me strength to make my decision. "I want to go back," he finally said. "They need me." Jesus nodded, his smile widening, Then go back, Callum. Come back and live. But always remember what you saw here. Before I could respond, I felt a force pulling me back. The light began to dim, the colors to disappear. The last thing I saw was the face of Jesus, full of love and understanding. And then, darkness. The way back was like diving into ice water. Suddenly, I felt pain, a sharp stabbing pain that seemed to come from every cell in my body. The air rushed into my lungs with a painful hiss, and my chest hurt as if it had been crushed. I opened my eyes, blinking against the bright light. It wasn't the celestial light I'd seen before, but the harsh clinical lights of a hospital room. The sounds around me were a shocking contrast to the peace I had experienced. The constant beeping of machines, urgent voices, the metallic sound of instruments being moved. "He's back," I heard someone shout. "We have stable vitals." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. A tube in my mouth prevented me from forming words. I panicked for a moment, feeling trapped and claustrophobic. "Mr. Hawke, please remain calm," said a gentle voice. A nurse leaned over me, her gentle eyes calming me. "You're in the hospital. You had a heart attack, but you're stable now. Don't try to talk yet, okay?" I nodded slightly, feeling a wave of exhaustion hit me. My eyes closed again, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next few days were a blur of tests, doctor appointments, and visits. I fluctuated between consciousness and unconsciousness, my body struggling to recover from the trauma it had suffered. When I finally managed to stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time, Rachel was at my side holding my hand. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but she was smiling. "Welcome back, love," she said softly. I wanted to tell her everything I had seen, everything I had experienced, but words seemed inadequate, unable to capture the magnitude of what I had experienced. Doctors told me I had been dead for 18 minutes, that it was a miracle that I survived, and an even greater miracle that I didn't suffer severe brain damage from lack of oxygen. But I knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a choice, my choice to return. Recovery was slow and painful. My body, which had once been strong and capable, now felt fragile and foreign. I had to relearn basic things: how to hold a spoon, how to walk, how to speak clearly. Every small achievement was celebrated. The first step without help, the first full meal, the first bath alone. Rachel was by my side every moment, encouraging me, supporting me, loving me unconditionally. The children came to visit me as soon as the doctors allowed them. Tommy and Sarah timidly entered the room, their eyes wide at the sight of me hooked up to so many tubes and machines. "Hey, champs," I said, my voice still hoarse. "Daddy's okay now. It's going to be okay." They ran to me, careful with the tubes but eager for a hug. I held them close to me, feeling their little bodies shaking with suppressed sobs. "Will you be able to build our treehouse now, Daddy?" Tommy asked, his voice muffled against my chest. I smiled, remembering the promise I had made, the reason I had chosen to return. "Of course I do, champ. As soon as I'm better, we're going to build the best treehouse you've ever seen." As I hugged my children, I looked at Rachel. She smiled through her tears, and I knew I had made the right choice. I was back, different, forever changed by what he had experienced, but back. And I was determined to live each day with the knowledge and love I had brought with me from that other place. In the months following my release from the hospital, I struggled to find a way to share my experience. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you put into words something that transcends language itself? At first, I tried to tell Rachel. We would sit on the porch on hot summer nights, after the kids went to bed, and I would try to describe what I had seen, what I had felt. It was like all the love in the universe was concentrated in a single point, I said, frustrated with the inadequacy of my words. And the colors, Rachel? The colors were vivid. No, more than vivid. They were conscious. Rachel listened patiently, holding my hand, her eyes full of love and concern. She didn't doubt me, she didn't question my sanity, but I could see that she didn't really understand. How could I? I tried to tell my closest friends, the pastor at our church. Reactions varied. Some listened with fascination, asking questions, wanting to know more. Others became visibly uncomfortable, quickly changing the subject. Pastor Mike was particularly receptive. He listened to me for hours, asking insightful questions, relating parts of my experience to passages from the Bible. "You know, Callum," he said after a long conversation, "there is much in your experience that echoes what mystics and saints have reported over the centuries. Perhaps you have been given a glimpse of what awaits us beyond the veil." His words were comforting, giving me context for what I had experienced. But still, I felt like I was just scratching the surface. I started reading voraciously, searching books about near-death experiences, spirituality, and quantum physics for something that could help me understand and explain what had happened to me. I found many similarities in other NDE accounts which brought me some comfort. I was not alone in this experience, but at the same time, each story was unique, personal, just like mine. Over time, I noticed that some memories of my experience were starting to become hazy. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. The more I tried to hold on to the details, the more they seemed to slip through my fingers. That scared me. What if I forgot everything? What if you lost that connection you had felt? I started writing a diary, trying to capture every detail I could remember. The indescribable colors, the feeling of oneness with everything, the unconditional love I had experienced. I filled pages and pages, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night with a sudden memory that I needed to record before it disappeared. Rachel would often find me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., writing furiously by the dim light of a lamp. "Callum," she said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder, "you need to rest." I knew she was right. My body was still healing, and the doctors had emphasized the importance of rest. But how could I sleep when I felt like I was missing out on precious parts of the most important experience of my life? It was during one of these writing nights that I had an epiphany. I was struggling to describe the feeling of being connected to everything when I suddenly remembered what it felt like to work with wood. The way you could feel the history of the tree and its fibers, how each piece had its own personality. I realized that perhaps I didn't need words to share my experience. Maybe I could express it through my work. The next day, still too weak to work with heavy tools, I picked up a piece of wood and began carving. I didn't have a plan. I just let my hands move, guided by the memory of that other place. Hours passed without me noticing. When I finally stopped, I looked at what I had created. It was an intricate pattern of lines and curves that seemed to flow and move, almost like the bright colors I had seen. It wasn't a literal representation, but it somehow captured the essence of what I had experienced. Rachel found me at the end of the day, covered in sawdust with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said, gently touching the carving. It's unlike anything you've ever done." I looked at my creation and then back at her. "It's a little piece of what I saw there," he said simply. At that moment, I saw a flash of understanding in Rachel's eyes. She might not have experienced what I experienced, but through my art, she could feel an echo of that. Over the next few months, as I regained my strength, I started creating more. Carvings, sculptures, even entire pieces of furniture that somehow incorporated elements of what I had seen and felt during my experience. I discovered that through my art, I could share my experience in a way that words never could. It wasn't a direct translation. How could it be? But it was a bridge, a way to connect this world with the one I had glimpsed. And slowly I realized that I didn't need to make everyone understand completely. The important thing was that I had changed. The way I saw the world, how I treated people, how I lived each day. All of this reflected what I had learned during those 18 minutes. Maybe this was the true way to share my experience. Living it every day, in every interaction, in every piece I created. The months turned into years, and gradually my life found a new rhythm. Externally, things seemed to have returned to normal. I was back to work, taking care of my family, living my daily routine. But inside, everything had changed. Every morning when I woke up, I remembered the feeling of being connected to everything. It completely changed the way I saw the world around me. The wood I worked with was no longer just a material, but a living being with its own history and purpose. The people I met were not strangers, but parts of a greater whole of which I was also a part. My work as a carpenter has transformed. Clients started to notice something different about the pieces I created. "They have soul," a lady once said, gently touching a table I had made. I smiled, knowing she was closer to the truth than I realized. My relationship with Rachel and the children has also changed. I was more present, more patient. The little everyday irritations that had once bothered me so much now seemed insignificant compared to the grand tapestry of life I had glimpsed. Tommy and Sarah, now a few years older, would sometimes catch me staring off into space, lost in thought. "Is Daddy thinking about heaven again?" Sarah asked, her voice full of childish curiosity. I smiled and pulled her close. "Yes, honey, Daddy's thinking about heaven." Over time, I learned to balance memories of my experience with the demands of everyday life. It wasn't always easy. There were days when reality seemed opaque and dull compared to what I had experienced. But then I remembered what Jesus had told me. I had chosen to return. There was a purpose in my return. I started to get more involved in the community. I volunteered at a homeless shelter, sharing not only my time, but the unconditional love I had experienced. I taught woodworking classes to at-risk youth, using the process of creating something beautiful from a raw piece of wood as a metaphor for personal transformation. My near-death experience also profoundly affected my spirituality. Although I continued to attend church, my faith now went beyond any specific doctrine or religion. I had experienced something that transcended words and beliefs, something that united all people and all things. Pastor Mike, who had been so receptive to my story, would sometimes invite me to share my experience with groups at church. I accepted, not to convince anyone, but to offer comfort and hope to those who were struggling with questions of faith and mortality. "What you experienced," Pastor Mike once told me, "is a powerful reminder that there is more to life and death than we can see or understand." As the years passed, the memories of my experience, while still profound and impactful, began to integrate more smoothly into the fabric of my everyday life. It was no longer a separate, extraordinary event that had happened to me, but a fundamental part of who I was and how I lived my life. And yet, there were moments when I was working with a particularly beautiful piece of wood, or when I watched the sun set in an explosion of color, or when I held my children close to me, when I felt an echo of that deep connection that I had experienced. In those moments I smiled, grateful for the second chance I had been given, and determined to live each day fully, with love and purpose. Sitting here, years after my near-death experience, I'm still amazed at the lasting impact those 18 minutes had on my life. They have shaped who I am, how I see the world, and how I interact with the people around me. I often wonder about the future. During my experience, I saw glimpses of events that have not yet happened, visions of a world in turmoil, but also of hope and renewal. I don't know when or if these visions will become reality, but they have given me a unique perspective on the challenges we face as a society and as a species. I watch the news about climate change, global conflicts, and social inequality, and I feel an urgency to do my part to create a better world. Not because I'm afraid of the future, but because I understand now, more than ever, how connected we all are. What affects one of us affects us all. My work as a carpenter has evolved to include more sustainable practices. I use wood from responsible sources and teach others about the importance of respecting and preserving our forests. Each tree, after all, is a living being with its own history and purpose. Rachel and I have been talking about the possibility of writing a book about my experience. Not to gain fame or money, but to offer hope and comfort to those who fear death or who have lost loved ones. I'm still uncertain about this, Some parts of my experience feel too sacred to be shared widely. But if you can help even one person find peace, it might be worth it. Tommy and Sarah, now teenagers, sometimes ask me profound questions about life and death. I do my best to respond honestly, sharing what I've learned but also acknowledging that there's a lot I still don't understand. I'm glad to see that my experience has helped them develop a broader, more compassionate perspective on life. As for the future, I am not afraid of death. I know that when my time here is done, I will be going to a place of unconditional love and acceptance. But I also know that every moment I have here is precious, an opportunity to grow, love, and make a difference. Sometimes when I'm working in my workshop, I feel a familiar presence. It's as if Jesus is there, silently watching, reminding me of the choice I made to return and the purpose I have here. In those moments, I stop what I'm doing, close my eyes, and simply feel gratitude. During my experience, I had unsettling glimpses of events that had not yet happened. One of the most disturbing visions was that of a world at war, with missiles falling on various parts of the planet. It was a scene of almost apocalyptic destruction, which filled me with fear and sadness. But even in this bleak vision, there was a ray of hope. I saw beings of light descending to Earth, interfering in some way to prevent the collapse from being total. These luminous beings seemed to guide humanity, protecting the planet from complete annihilation. I don't know when or if this vision will become reality. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by these images, but then I remember the intervention of those beings of light, and that gives me hope. It makes me believe that no matter how dark the future may seem, there are forces working to protect and guide us. These views have given me a unique perspective on the challenges we face as a society and as a species. I watch the news about global tensions, nuclear proliferation, and conflict, and I can't help but wonder if we are getting closer to that future I envisioned. But instead of paralyzing me with fear, these visions motivate me to do my part to create a better world, to work for peace and understanding between people. I don't know what the future holds for me or the world. The visions I saw during my experience sometimes worry me, but they also give me hope. I saw challenges, yes, but I also saw humanity's incredible ability to come together, to show compassion, to overcome adversity. My hope for the future is that more people can experience, even for a moment, the feeling of connection and unconditional love that I experienced. Not necessarily through a near-death experience, I hope not, but through moments of deep empathy, compassion, and understanding. In the meantime, I continue to live each day the best I can, treating each person I encounter as part of the same big cosmic family, seeing the beauty and purpose in every piece of wood I touch, in every sunrise I witness. And if there's one message I'd like to share with the world, based on my experience, it would be this: love is real. It is the most powerful force in the universe, and it is available to all of us, here and now. We just need to open our hearts to feel it, and our eyes to see it in everything around us. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know that no matter what happens, we will all be connected, all part of something bigger and more beautiful than we can imagine. And that, for me, is more than enough.